Right, the other format that we're going to cover is spreadsheets. So if you've ever worked with Microsoft Excel, you should be familiar with spreadsheets. A spreadsheet file stores data in columns and rows. These can be stored in Excel specific format, so like a .xls or a .xlsx, or also commonly a CSV file. So we saw some CSV files before, and there's just plain CSV is just plain text in a sequence of characters that is human readable with a standard text editor. So each line indicates a data record, and then each record consists of one or more fields separated by a delimiter. So just to go back, so an example of this was the world demographics, but there's also all sorts of other Microsoft Excel stuff that you might be familiar with. So this actually comes from this table right here is a supplementary table from a science paper, and so this science paper contains all sorts of supplementary data in this Excel file, and Excel files have multiple worksheets. So in this case it has 14 independent worksheets that each contain its own unique data. So we want to be able to get this data either into Python, either from a CSV file or from an Excel file. And so we want to use Pandas in order to do that. So Pandas, this is probably one of the most this is one of the most useful code bases in Python, and it is used, like if you ever heard of data science, if you ever want to be a data scientist, you have to become very familiar with Pandas. It's a very powerful, flexible, fast, and easy to use data analysis and manipulation tool, and many other modules like visualization libraries are often built on top of using Pandas data frames. And so these data frames are ways to store data, and typically this data is always like a CSV or an Excel type data stuff. So to get started on this, you need to install Pandas. So Pandas, again, is a module, and it's pretty straightforward. You just need to run this right here, and you'll be able to install Pandas. So Pandas is so big it actually takes almost half a second to actually import the module into the interpreter. So one thing to note is that typically it's very common, instead of importing Pandas and using the full name Pandas, you typically rename it, and PD is kind of what you rename it as. So this statement right here, import Pandas as PD, this just allows us to use the Pandas module just with the 2 letters Pandas. So this is very common, and so that I'm following the kind of the standards of how people do it. If you want to read in, so this would take a whole semester to really cover all of the details of Pandas. So we're only going to touch on some of the things that are possible to do with Pandas. But you'll notice, just like if you look at the module itself, there's all sorts of different types of constructors. There's all sorts of different types of methods, and all of these are very powerful. Many of these are very powerful to use. So we are going to use Pandas now just to read in a CSV file. And so if you follow this, you have successfully read in this world demographics.csv. And so we can type it, and we can see that we have a file that matches. So this data within Pandas now matches the data within the CSV file. So we have this population ID, country code, level, continent code, etc. And all this data is within there. And this object is called a data frame. So we're going to spend 2 lectures kind of going over all the different things you can do with Pandas. But a data frame is one of the types, one of the object types that is fundamental to Pandas, and then the other one is a series. So a series, so if you look at an individual column, the way you can do that is either with a dot operator or with a slicing operator, kind of like it's a dictionary. But this object that is returned is a series object. So these are kind of 2 of the fundamental data type that Panda uses. So how do we read this in? Well, we gave it, so we use this this method called readCSV, and we gave it the name of the file. So we wanted to open worlddemographics.csv. We also have to specify what the delimiter is, and so in this case the delimiter is a comma, but you can have some files that are, for example, tab delimited, and it's solely able to also parse those. And then finally we also specified an index column. So that's another important part of Pandas data frames, is that they have index columns. And so this first column right here is what's used as an index, this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's just see what happened if we didn't specify the index column. You notice that we have this unnamed right here. And so we have all of these numbers, and it's almost like we've repeated this whole column again. And so that's because Pandas has created an index from scratch because we did not tell it which column to use as the index column. So we're going to just reopen it, and now we can use it. All right, so we have the index, and we have successfully read in this CSV file. You can also read in Excel files. So that Excel file that I've included in example data, and if I could just, not sure why this is doing it this way. So when you first try to do it, most likely you're going to get an error that looks like this, and that just indicates that you haven't installed one of the necessary modules. So this is a dependency, an optional dependency, but this is just used for reading in Excel format files. So OpenPyXL is necessary for opening Excel files. So if you quit the interpreter and go to the command line and run this to install this OpenPyX, then you should be able to read this in successfully. So this time we specified we're reading in an Excel file, and now what are the optional arguments that we need? So for an Excel file, we need to specify the sheet name. So only one of these sheets will get read in at a time. And we need to specify that using this argument called sheet name. And so we're reading in this table S4 right here. The other thing you'll notice we added was skip rows equals 0. So notice that the column names are on row 2. And so we just want to skip this first row and not read it in, because this is just kind of like a header with metadata. And so we do that, and now we have successfully read in the data from this sheet on the Excel file. All right, so far so good. We've managed to read in data from a CSV file, and we've managed to read in data from an Excel file.